Hi, I'm Charlotte from Birth Essence, and today in the Birth Summit we are welcoming Katie Edwards, and she is hello. She is a KG hypnobirthing instructor, a birth coach, and a spoken word artist, a musician. You're many things, and I'm delighted to speak to you. And a mother, we nearly forgot that one. And delighted to speak to you today.
Thank you, Charlotte. I don't know if I'm a musician. I don't know about that bit. I drum in a band.
Drumming band, that's musician for me.
Yeah.
that's the first thing I noticed. Everyone wants to play down, and it's like we're picking up like it's music, and drumming is wonderful. It's a wonderful rhythmic beat. It feels like it goes well with the birth conversation to me.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, I love it.
My husband is African, so he's the drumming and the African, the beats. I love that. I love that kind of. It makes, for me, it feels like sort of primal and in the earth, and makes me think about birth.
It's the most primal sound. Like the band I'm in, we play the most primal sound. It's so amazing. We're called Drum Machine, and we're a 30-piece drumming band. We play samba drums, but we don't play samba. We play techno, drum and bass, and it's really primal. I love it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about birth anyway.
I know. So, with that bit of background, you have 2 children, is that right? We've got
I did.
2 children, and you've had a journey from fear to confidence, essentially. Would you tell us a little bit how you first felt when you were pregnant and what you did about that?
Yeah, so when I was first pregnant, I wasn't a KG hypnobirthing teacher then, and I wasn't a KG hypnobirthing trainer, and I wasn't even a doula, and I didn't really know anything about birth whatsoever. And I just remember going to my first midwife appointment, and I was really excited to be pregnant, and I hadn't really thought about the birth. And then when I remember the midwife asking me, where am I going to give birth? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I didn't know there was any options. I just thought, well, you have your baby in a hospital. And she said, well, you can have your baby in a hospital or in a birth centre or at home. And I said, at home for my first one? I don't think so. And she said, oh, it could be quite a good option for some people. And I said, oh, I don't think for me. And I just literally had no idea. And then when I thought about it, I'd kind of grown up with the idea that birth was something to be endured, that perhaps it was something to be feared as well. My mum hadn't had a very good experience giving birth to me. She didn't really know. She said that she can't remember knowing that breathing helped, for example. So she didn't go to any of those classes that her friend went to that was all about the breathing. And she just wanted not to feel anything, and she handed over the birth experience, really, or everything, to her doctor. And apparently he was this very charismatic obstetrician who said, don't worry, dear, I'll take everything, I'll take care of everything, leave everything to me. And so she did, and she went into hospital, and apparently she went into labour in hospital, but she can't remember being induced. So potentially, I think she was just there for days and days because she was so scared. She wanted an epidural. She got an epidural, and then when she woke up, she felt like her legs were paralyzed, and just the whole experience. It wasn't a great experience, despite it all being managed by someone else. And then I suppose when it came to me giving birth, and I started to meet people on my journey when I was pregnant who gave me a different idea about birth. When this midwife at first said to me, like, oh, you could give birth at home, the first thing I did was went home. I thought, why would people give birth at home? Isn't that crazy? Isn't that just mental? And then when I started to look at the evidence and anecdotal evidence as well about why people were sort of taking more control of their births and giving birth at home, and I looked at the benefits, I was like, oh, that's why. And I started to learn about the iatrogenic harm that is going on in the medicalized system. And I'm not completely against medicalized births at all. I'm extremely pro-choice, but I just feel like a lot of women really aren't informed about their options. Yeah, does that answer? the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you were approaching giving birth to yours, what choice did you make for your first in the end, having those thoughts? What did you do?
Right, so it took several weeks and months really of me debating it, you know, this idea of a home birth. So I did end up having a home birth. I had both my children at home, but it didn't happen, you know, straight away. I didn't read all that bump and go, oh yeah, maybe. It was kind of like just in the back of my mind, well, of course I'm so, okay, they've got all this, you know, benefits of a home birth. Right. And then so I remember going, when I was about 8 months pregnant, I was at Soulfest Festival in Cumbria, and I encountered the yurt of the Association of Radical Midwives, who had their yurt in the healing fields at the festival. And because I was pregnant, I was having rather a different kind of festival, perhaps, to normal. And I spent loads of time in this lovely yurt with these beautiful birthy folk, just talking about birth. They introduced me to Ina May Gaskin, and they introduced me to scripts as well, you know, like relaxation scripts and visualizations. So I learned some skills that I could actually learn at the birth. I then did a course with Dot Parry, like a natal hypnotherapy course. Well, in fact, I did half a natal hypnotherapy course. I just did the relaxation bit, and I didn't have very much money at the time. So I didn't do the whole thing, and it was split up into these 2 sections. And I remember saying to her, do I need to do them both? And she said, oh, well, you know, both are useful, but if you're just going to do one, do the relaxation bit and not the theory. So I did. And actually, I really wish I would have done the whole course, because there were definitely things that I didn't know that if I would have known, it would have made my experience better. Of the course. And then one of my friends, a really old friend of mine, she'd trained to be a midwife, and I'd mentioned all this stuff to her. I'm thinking about having my baby at home, and she was like, oh yeah, brilliant. And you know, she seemed to really understand that actually the system that we all think it is saving us and helping our babies and ourselves, that in many respects it's actually causing the problems that it's then solving, if that makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, I didn't know about any of this when I first embarked upon my pregnancy journey, and these were all things that I learned.
Yeah. Were you feeling quite confident by the time you came to give birth to your first, or was it still scary because it was the first time you'd done it?
Yeah, I think I was feeling quite confident. I was feeling like there really is no reason that I have to doubt myself or my body. I'd listened to lots of the hypnotherapy scripts, and you know that I guess the fears I had been taken away, and I was quite confident. I was very confident that I was just going to get on with it, and I had learned lots of skills because I'd done lots of practice. You know, be getting really, really deeply relaxed. And when I was deeply relaxed, you know, I'd been listening to these hypnotherapy scripts. So the positive suggestions and positive affirmations had all been sinking into my subconscious. And honestly, the birth was harder than I imagined, because I was really confident. I was like, yeah, I can do this. But I still did do it. You know, I still managed it. And I think in hindsight, the things that I really wish that I would have known had I have done the theory part of the course, just things like I had, when I actually gave birth the first time, I had 5 midwives in my birth space, plus my husband, plus my mum, and it's a really strange reason why my mum ended up being in my birth space, because I hadn't invited but my husband was ill. He'd got back from work, ready to be my birth partner, and I'd been labouring all day, and it was the last day before Christmas, so before he finished, so we had loads of work on, and I'd gone into labour that morning at like 5:30, and I didn't tell him about it, I didn't wake him up and, oh, I'm in labour. It was a couple of hours before I told, like, he woke up and I said, oh, do you know what, things are starting to happen, I'm sure. And he said, do you want me to stay off work? And I said, no, it's your last day, you know, you go into work and I'll just carry on labouring and see what happens. You're only half an hour away. So off he went. And then when he arrived home at like 5:30, like, things were starting to get more regular. And I was like, oh, I'm really glad you're here. And he arrived at the door, like, sweating, and he was like, Kate, I'm so ill. He's like, and he had diarrhea and vomiting. He's got like norovirus, you know, right? And I was like, oh, right. And then, so he took himself to bed. I was like, oh, right, what am I going to do now? You know, because I'd done the course, and he was meant to be like my birth partner, so he knew about all the prompts, and he knew about, you know, I hadn't registered anything like when I call the midwives, you know, how many surges do you have to have in 10 minutes before you call the midwives. All of that was his job. I'm just going to give birth, you know. And then my mum arrived about 10 minutes later, with this chair that she wanted to give to me. And I was like, oh, hi, I didn't know you were bringing this chair, but thanks. And I think I'm in labour and Dave's ill. And she said, oh, do you want me to stay? And do you want anything? I said, yes, I'd like a curry in Rusholme. So she took me to have a takeaway. And I was actually in labour. The man at the curry house where I used to go regularly, he said, oh, like, when's the baby due? And I said, now, I'm in labour. And
what did he say?
Oh, he went, oh, I think you better go home now. Okay.
I really wanted to have it in the restaurant.
Yeah. And he was a bit surprised. And then I came home, and my mum was brilliant, actually. She, you know, she rubbed my back all night, and then Dave, my husband, he mustered up enough energy by the morning, and he blew the pool up. But I had 5 midwives in my space, plus my mum, plus my husband, when I gave birth. And that was just because I had one midwife with me, who was like my rock, Dot Harry. So she was kind of like my doula, I guess, and she taught me the techniques. So I really wanted her there. But then it was shift changeover. So 2 midwives were leaving and 2 were appearing, and they'd been with me, you know, the first 2. I just didn't want her to go. And she'd been with me all day, and I had all that. Just, please don't go. I you know, I didn't say that to her, but in my heart, I didn't want new midwives. I wanted her to stay. And then people were chatting in my birth space. It was Christmas Eve, so they were all excited. What are you doing at Christmas? And I could hear everyone chatting about Christmas, and I didn't have anyone to say, like, could you be quiet, please? It's really distracting. I just need to be in my zone. I need to focus on what my body's doing. And so I had all this going on, and this worry that my midwife was going to leave. And actually the evidence says that ideally you would have that continuity. And I get, you know, they can't be with me for 36 hours, but, you know, not knowing who coming to the end, or almost giving birth, and not knowing who my midwife was going to be, and there was going to be a changeover, was actually just, it probably made, I'm sure it made my labour last longer. Like, birth physiology says that if you're anxious or worried about anything, it's your body isn't going to be working as effectively. The hormones are not going to be making your baby come out. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, it's beautiful. But you did give birth in the end, despite all that. I'm always amazed at how well we give birth, considering, like, you know, the conditions many people do, and even there with 5 people in your space. And
yeah,
you did it.
So, yeah, despite that, I did it. And it was harder than I imagined. I remember thinking afterwards, like, oh God, I wouldn't do that again. But after, you know, a few days later, I thought, yeah, I would absolutely do it that way again. Of course, in fact, I did, because when I was pregnant the second time, I wanted everything to be the same, and I wanted you know, to give birth at home again, and I was going to practice the same techniques, and the second time was a lot easier. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm guessing you didn't have 5 people there talking this time, because you kind of
No.
know, you don't know what you don't know the first time, and then the second time you're like, okay, this and this.
Yeah, it was a lot easier the second time. So the second time, I didn't use NHS midwives, because I'd got to 7 months. I'd moved areas by this point, and the midwife I had at my first birth, Hayley, she's amazing. In fact, she trained as a KGH teacher. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that but she yeah, I'd moved areas, and my iron count was a little bit low, and the midwife had said to me, well dear, you know, if you don't take these iron tablets, then you can rule that out your home birth. You know, don't be thinking you're gonna have a home birth if you don't take these iron tablets. And I thought, I'm not really happy about the language used there, and especially because I'd said to her, actually this happened in my last birth and my iron count was a bit low, and I altered my diet. I ate loads of green leafy vegetables with vitamin C for absorption, and the next time I was checked it was absolutely fine. So I'd already told her this, and she was telling me, no, I still do have to take these iron tablets. And and I felt like, what? Are you listening to me? Have you just heard what I said? Like, this is how I'm probably not gonna take these tablets. I'm probably gonna alter it with diet. And I suppose a lot of people might say that and not do it, and maybe that's what's in our head, but I just didn't feel listened to. And it turns out that it wasn't the test that I needed to have to get these tablets. Was I hadn't had that right test. So when I eventually got the test 2 weeks later, and I changed my diet in the interim, actually my iron count was absolutely normal, like I thought it would be. But that fact that I wasn't being listened to, I felt, gosh, if that's what's happening now, when I get to my birth space and I'm stating my case and I'm not being listened to, that's not going to be conducive for a great birth experience. So I was telling somebody about this, and she said, oh, have you heard about one-to-one midwives? So I swapped my care, and unfortunately one-to-one midwives are no longer running, which is an absolute tragedy, because it was an absolutely first class service, a gold standard service. I knew who my midwife was. I met her, and she came to my house for the appointments. She was absolutely lovely. She was 100% on board. She didn't instill any fear in me at all. She was just like, yeah, we're gonna do this. And you know, I'd had a baby before at home, so all the risk, you know, I don't like really bringing in the word risk, but I didn't really have any risk factors at all. And yeah, we had a really lovely time, and it was filmed as well, for
Yeah,
the
I was listening to
BBC.
that. Yeah, you became famous. So tell me a little bit about being filmed. Why did you decide to be filmed, and what was that like?
Okay, well, so why did I decide to be filmed? The first time I gave birth, that was, both times were filmed. The first time was filmed as well. And I think it was because I'd been so scared about giving birth all my life, really. You know, I'd sit my mum's horrible story, and you know, the things that you see on film and TV. And I remember being about 13 and seeing a woman giving birth in a biology class on film, and she was lying on her bed and she was screaming, and I thought, you know, it definitely acted as contraception for a very, very long time. I just thought, oh my God, is that what birth is? And when I did the course with Dr. Parry, I remember seeing women giving birth for the first time in calm on video, on a couple of videos, and I was just like, wow, that's amazing. And she said, yeah, you know, you do your practice, just relax, get really, really deeply relaxed, and you know, your birth can be like this. And I said, are any of these videos, are any of them first time mums? And she said no. And I said, why is it not possible for a first time mum to give birth in this way? And she said, oh no, it is. It's just that nobody's ever asked, and nobody's ever volunteered, you know, to have their birth filmed. And I felt like it would really have empowered me if I'd have seen a first time mum giving birth in this way. So at the end of, you know, a few days later, I thought about it, and I thought, do you know what, if you want to come and film my birth, so you can show other first-time mums, like, you're very welcome. So she did. So that's why Dot was at my first birth, and she filmed it. And then I hadn't really discussed with her how I wanted it filming. So I had imagined that it would be all about the environment, and, you know, just how calm the environment is, and, you know, me just kind of moaning and making the noises that came naturally to me. But I hadn't discussed it. And actually what she did was film my vagina for about the last 2 hours, because she didn't know when the baby was coming out. Yeah, so when I saw the footage, I was like, what? Like, why would you do that? And she said, I didn't want to miss the baby coming out. It's like, I'm not interested in that bit. I was interested in, like, showing people, like, the calm environment. So when it came to me giving birth the second time, there was this little voice in my head that was like, maybe it only went well the first time because it was filmed. Right. So I had this little voice in my head, and then about 2 weeks after that, I got a phone call from Dot saying that she'd her head office had been her head office had a call from someone from Landmark Films who was making a film about birth, a documentary about birth, and they were looking for women who were giving birth outside of mainstream, who could articulate their reasons for doing so in a clear and concise way. And she said, oh, I thought you'd be perfect for this. And so I rang the producer, and I spoke to her for like a couple of hours or more on the phone, and then she came up from, like, down south to visit me, and we chatted some more, and I felt like she would really represent my case fairly, I guess, and I felt like she wasn't just going to take the mickey, and that she'd do a good job, and I really, really liked her. So she was one of the people. Actually, she was in my birth space the second time, and she was fantastic. You know, I didn't have a full birth, like, people think I had a big camera crew, and I didn't. I just had one woman with a camera, like a really amazing BBC camera, that and I'd met her over the past 2 months. I think we'd done 12 days of filming over the past 2 months, and we'd been out for coffee and lunch, and by that point she was my friend, so it wasn't like having a stranger in my birth space. And she stayed well back. She didn't interview me. I think there was like one time where she spoke to me during, like, from the moment she turned up. She just hung well back and just allowed the birth to unfold. And then I had this midwife who had known me as well, so I wasn't meeting her for the first time on that day, and it was just such a beautiful experience. And there was just the midwife. Oh, and then the second midwife turned up. I don't remember that very much. Rebecca Arnold, the producer for Landmark Films, and my husband, and that was it. And there was no noise going on in the background, and I just felt really safe, and I felt really nurtured, and I'm so grateful to have that experience. And just little things that I didn't even know until that point. For example, when she turned up, I said to her, oh, are you going to check me? And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, are you going to give me a vaginal examination to see how dilated I am? And she said, oh, no. She went, it's not standard procedure where I work. This was like during my second labour. And I said, what do you mean? Well, how will you know how dilated I am? And she said, oh, I don't need to know. She said, it doesn't mean anything anyway. She said, you can go from 4 centimetres to 10 centimetres in 10 minutes. It doesn't mean anything. I was like, she said, I can tell by other ways, from the little noises you make and things like that, like how far you are along. I don't need to know how dilated you are, but I can check you if you want. And I said, oh, well, I've had, because I'm all for new experiences. So because last time I had checks, this time I'll have, I'll experience no checks and see what the difference is. And so I did, and actually just being left to it without having vaginal examination, like routine vaginal examinations, which really may misinform people. I think as a routine procedure, it really isn't very nice for women, and can be, I do think it probably causes too many women to not, or the birth physiology and the birth process not to be effective. Does that make sense? Yeah,
Yeah,
to you?
because sometimes your body might be responding differently to how you are. So again, it's like the preparation, because your mind might want it because you want to be reassured how far along you are, but your body might still experience that as an invasion. So it might not, depending on how your mind body connection is, how well you know you are, and how gentle the person is, how well you trust them, how safe you feel, all those factors. And if you've really wanted it and you feel supported, and particularly if you then go, oh, you're 8 centimeters, which is what happened to me in my first, you then be reassured. But it can go the other way if you're only 2 centimeters and you think that that means you've got X number of hours and you can't cope and you've not got anywhere, or if you're the same number of centimeters next time you're examined, it can be discouraging. Whereas if you don't know, but the midwife's saying, I know from how you are, and again, we're talking about routine rather than something where you, whether something's wrong or right. Again, that's not the first port of call. So I think that the communication with your body that you have will help you know what's the right thing for you in the moment, when it's not routine and it's a real choice then. Because for some people they are reassured, and for many, I think when you really examine it, it's why do you need that reassurance in that way? And that's the preparation of, and the knowledge that there are other ways. It's not like the midwife's going blind and hasn't got a blind clue because she hasn't done that. You know, like there's the smell, there's the movement, there's the sound, there's the instinct and intuition, everything. Midwives and women, and also the women know. All the times I've seen it, and it's anecdotal, I don't think I've ever done a study on it, if you ask a woman where she is, how dilated she is, she can usually tell you, and she's usually right. So women that are, especially when you have more information, and especially when it's not the first time, so you've already got an experience, you know, but even first time mothers, you know where you are and if things are okay or not. But when the fear, if the fear is too high, you haven't done the preparation and you're too scared, you might not know, not because you don't know, because you can't get in connection with the knowledge, because you're in the fear and that's swaying you, like you can't, oh my god, this is gonna happen, and it's all the what ifs. That's where your energy is. So it's hard to get in contact with the body. But when you're not fearful and it's a quiet space, you can find those answers. That's what
I thought that vaginal examinations were compulsory throughout my entire first labour and birth. I thought that somehow, if unless that midwife knows how dilated I am, then this baby isn't coming out. I just thought it was a compulsory part of birth. And it was something that I had kind of worried about, like, oh, I don't really want to do that, but okay. And I was asked for my consent, is it all right if I do this? And
if you don't know, you can say no. It's a funny thing, isn't it?
I could say no. Yeah, I didn't know I could say no. All the reasons why I might, and so I always tell my clients this, and people, that actually you do have a choice, and it's a legitimate choice. It's, you don't have to just go along with everything that's offered, because those things might be impinging upon your birth physiology and your just ability to get on naturally. So for example, if you've got a horse, think of a really expensive dressage horse or eventing a mare, and she's giving birth to a foal, you just leave her to it. Let her get on with it, and let her feel safe in a familiar place, so she feels comfortable, and she'll just get on with it. You wouldn't then pick her up and then move her to another place where there's loads of mares giving, a clinic where there's loads of mares giving birth, where she's kind of like, oh, what's going on here? And you wouldn't do that. You'd leave her where she is. And why are we not doing that to women? Yeah. For most women, most of them can give birth effectively, and yet we're in this cultural soup that we're all swimming, where there's lots of fear, and women are being told your baby's too big, your baby's too small.
And I think it's a really key point from what you said, was that you actually had some concerns about it the first time, but you didn't know that it wasn't compulsory. And both me and you, we did something similar, is you didn't tell her you were feeling like that. So she probably didn't realise you didn't know you could say no, because she's asking for your consent. So she's expecting to say no or yes, and has no clue that you've slipped through the net and don't know. And you didn't say, and I don't mean to say that in a blaming way, but we are so conditioned as women not to speak up for our needs, not to say how we're feeling because we might get ridiculed. And in that space, and you're in labour, so you don't, and if it's that point, so you don't say, and in pregnancy even, it didn't occur to you to say, actually, I'm not sure about that, just to talk, you know, like you may have done more so with your second midwife who you got to know. And I was the same. I had slight fears in my first birth that I didn't voice for fear of looking stupid in the moment, that they would have been able to reassure me, and they didn't know I was thinking that because I didn't tell them. And that's a conditioning that we have as women in general that is very common, and I would love women to hear that as a message in what you've just said, of like something being resolved, and you might still have chosen to have them, but the you would have released that worry about it, because you would have been able to speak to people and
Absolutely.
think, oh.
And a similar note, I was too polite to say, could you please be quiet in my birth space as well. You know, exactly, I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to, and interestingly, the very first time I doulaed, a really similar thing happened where so the midwives were who were helping my client give birth, and then off they were finishing their shift, and new ones came, and they all had a changeover in the actual room where my client was. And I kept thinking to myself, surely they're not talking, you know, surely they're not doing this, having this conversation in the birth space. There's a million other rooms, several other rooms in the house they could be doing this, you know, why bring this into the birth space? And I felt too polite, like, it's just going to finish any second now, they're going to stop any second now. So I didn't say anything, and it just carried on, and I was thinking, oh, I need to say, shall I say something? And I just didn't, and it went on for ages. And I felt, you know, as a doula, you know, I felt like actually I should be keeping the birth space calm, and maybe that shouldn't have been going on. And literally, you know, I learned from my mistake, because if that ever happens again, or if it's ever happened again, when I've been a doula, or when I tell my clients that actually if there is something going on in your birth space that is distracting you, or you would rather it not be that way, please say, because you literally have no idea how long it's going to go on for.
Yeah, anything at all. Yeah, and you can have like a birth partner who can also say, you can have signals, and it's really the good girl kind of archetype and conditioning undoes a lot of things for women, both, like as you said, for the care provider and for the woman. So when we know that she exists, like this is really valuable to have for people listening. When we know she exists, if you know that you have that in you, you can then dialogue with her in advance and put plans in place to make sure that she doesn't stop you from, you know, like, oh, I can't rock the boat, or I don't want to be an inconvenience to people, when you're supposed to be the centre of the whole gig, you know, it's your gig of giving birth. So it's really valuable, really valuable. Yeah, it's wonderful to share. Thank you for sharing that. And for having it's like courage to share something where you are perceiving it that as a mistake that you learn from. It's really valuable to share that, for everyone to learn from that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I hope, you know, you make these mistakes and then you just say, like, please don't do this, or, you know, just if someone's giving birth and actually they, you know, they're being distracted, people are talking, or, you know, even if somebody's touching you, you know, and they might be being really nice, but you don't need, if you really don't want to be touched, just say it's okay, thank you, or whatever you want to say. And if that's set up in advance that you can do that, then you don't have to just appease somebody else by, you know, I remember my husband stroking me the first time, and it was so sweet, but I actually allowed him to do it, even though I really didn't want to be touched, because I just wanted to appease him. And actually I was giving birth, and you know, I could have said what it was that I needed or didn't need, and I always encourage that in my classes.
Yeah. And it's so wonderful to speak in advance, because you can then reassure, particularly when it's your partner, it doesn't mean you've done something wrong, or I'm not feeling supported by you if I want you to back off. Because I really felt my husband's presence in the room when he wasn't touching me. It was valuable, and I didn't want to be touched. There's a certain point in labour, I think in the early labour, you often want to be touched, and as it goes on, you don't want to be touched, and there's a crossover point. And I find that particularly male partners, it's quite common they don't recognize that, because they so want to take care of you, and normally you love the touch, and being touched is so wonderful, focused in that moment, and you don't want it anymore, and you just don't. It's very common not to want it, and you're like, girl, and if you're normally this quiet person, you're like, ah, because you can't say it any other way. Like, it can come out that way if you've got a, just because you're in labor, and also if you're scared to say it, you hold back, this, oh, you know, and then it's like, oh, you know, and actually if you pre-said it, it's much smoother, and you can just, you know, and they know.
Yeah, absolutely. That
I actually be helpful. So then being helpful. Sorry, go on.
There might be a point in your labour where you do want to be touched, and then actually you don't, and so to set that up in advance, and just say, actually, there might come a point where I don't want to be touched, and I'm going to let you know now that I might say that. So
and then when you understand, you can't really verbalise things in labour, so you might just go, you know, that's a whole sentence. With please and thank you and everything, that is.
I heard recently, no is a complete sentence. As well. I thought that was really, really valuable. What's the Yorkshire Stork doula who said that? Oh, I've forgotten the name, but it's temporarily.
Well, I'll have a look for it. We are very conditioned to be polite, and when, like, you know, my husband's culture, they don't say please, and some cultures they don't say please and thank you, and the same, and it's kind of the tone and the energy you use. So when you've talked about it, if you can let go of the cultural obligation to say please and thank you, and just know that you're just communicating a message and they're receiving it, and it's all with love, then it can be really helpful.
It was Deborah Niger, she's a midwife from the Yorkshire Storks. She said no is a complete sentence recently online. I was like, that's brilliant.
I'll tag her about that. Excellent. So okay, what would be your vision for the future of birth and motherhood? I know we've spoken about some of the things we'd like to see change. What would be your vision?
Oh, there's so many. So ideally, I would love for everyone to have continuity of carer. So if everybody who was giving birth knew who, you know, maybe of one of two skilled attendants, skilled midwives that were going to be with them, and that followed them on their journey, that would be wonderful, because we know, the evidence says, that the number one thing that affects outcomes is knowing your midwife better than any you know, technology or drug that can be given to women. Knowing your midwife reduces the stillbirth rate, it improves satisfaction for birth, it reduces the chance that you're going to have a cesarean and instrumental deliveries. Knowing your midwife, so let everyone have continuity of carer. That would be wonderful. It would be great if doulas were more prevalent, both for antenatally, but also postnatally as well, to help women get back on their feet. So, you know, oh, who's your doula? If that became, you know, a thing, who's going to help you in those early days? Someone who's been there before. They're not going to judge you. They're just going to help you with your wishes and to be informed. So that would be really lovely. It'd be, you know, if just women were informed and supported, and they feel safe, and they weren't being coerced. There's so much coercion that goes on with I think if women knew what risk meant as well, they really understood risk, because as women, or as birthing people, or as parents to be, we are pre-programmed not to take risks with our offspring. We want, you know, if someone tells us, oh, if you're doing that and it's risky, you'd be go, oh, I don't want to do that. I'm going to keep my offspring safe. Thank you very much. But we don't, I think most people don't really have an understanding of what risk actually means. So, for example, if they're, say, you know, when I say them, maybe the healthcare professionals that are caring for you, if they say, oh, well, if your risk will double if you do that, you might say, oh, well, I don't want my risk to be doubled, and I want to keep my baby safe. But that risk might be doubled from 1 in 1,000 to 2 in 1,000. And that risk might be high or low, depending on your view. So, and I think it's the person giving birth, it's their responsibility to make a judgment on how they see that risk and what they want to do. rather than being coerced into doing the intervention, because women aren't being informed, they're not being told what their options are and the benefits and risks of all their options. They're only being told, say, if we recommend this intervention, and if you don't do it, this is what will happen, and if you do it, that's a good thing. And yeah, in order to make an informed choice, people need to be told what their options are and the benefits and risks of each of their options, including doing nothing. And so they can make an informed decision. And I think that's not what's happening, especially with induction, right now. So many women are being told, like, if the baby's not induced, then they're putting their baby at risk. And so we've had this massive epidemic in recent times where I can't remember the last client that I've had who hasn't been recommended induction for one reason or another. And I think a lot of women don't even know that they can decline it if they want to. They're just accepting it. And there are, it's not a foolproof method. Yeah, some people expect that with an induction, the baby might be here in a few hours and they're going to meet the baby, and understandably they're really excited. But actually, it might take days and days, and there may be risks of the induction process that they're not being told about, so that they can't make, so they're not making informed decisions. So I think a continuity of carer, doulas becoming the norm would be great, and women just being more informed about all their options and having an understanding of risk. I think those things would help.
Yeah, excellent. And what would you suggest to a woman who is currently really terrified of giving birth that would help her to feel more confident?
I would say go and do a course, go and find somebody in your area who can listen to what your fears are, understand them, and then you can look at where those fears might have come from. So I teach KG Hypnobirthing, and you'd really take someone like that on a journey, so by the end they're feeling calmer, more confident, informed, empowered, all those things that actually we need. All, ideally birth is safer when women feel like that, and birth isn't safe when we are so scared. I think so. Yeah, go and find someone in your community. Maybe go to a positive birth group. That might be a good place to meet someone like that. Look up who your local hypnobirthing teachers are, and choose someone who aligns. There's lots of profiles on there. Choose someone who aligns with you and your values. But don't leave it. If someone's feeling super scared, I suppose it's really easy to kind of bury your head in the sand, like, I'm not going to think about it, I'm just going to get that, I'm just going to do it. But actually what they don't realize is they're probably going to take the mainstream conveyor belt of care that everyone gets put on, and they don't realize that isn't necessarily woman-centered or parent-centered. It's the system is designed for efficiency. There may not be staff, it might not be adequately staffed, so the care that they're meant to get, well, it may not be that at all. So I would just say go and learn as much as you can, from ideally with somebody rather than just from a book. I think it's really easy to miss things from a book or from even like an online course. You might be lucky, but if you can find someone, if that's your thing, then I think that would really help.
Yes. I have a slightly random question, like it's not on the list, but
Okay.
How did it feel giving birth? I'm interested, like when you're like kind of changing the dialogue a little bit of like everyone thinks that it's painful and hurt, and then that's an absolutely bad thing, we want to avoid that, we just want to get the birth over with, and
Yeah.
and but in a sort of real way, just how did it feel in the reality as opposed to all those sort of fears of how we think it's going to be? How did it
Okay,
compare?
right.
It doesn't have to be all positive. I just mean like a real person's
Yeah,
view on, we have these like fears of what we think it's going to be, and we're dreading it, and then you work through it and you feel confident. You've got all these different, we haven't seen it in the community where it's not just like an ordinary everyday thing anymore. And then when
yeah,
you've experienced it and had some distance from it, because it's as ordinary as life gets and as extraordinary at the same time. So to hear
yeah.
real women saying what they're experiencing in their own words and different, just a few words of like the energy of it, the feeling of it, how you
Right.
afterwards.
Yeah, so I suppose I've given birth twice without any medication, like no gas and air, even my first one, even my first one. And I guess the first time, it was, the sensations were way stronger than I imagined. Honestly, I'd seen women giving birth in total calm and thought it was going to be like that, but really bloody hurt. The sensations were really strong, and it got to the end, and I felt like I was stretching. I felt like I was going to tear, but I was like, I felt like I pushed so hard that I just didn't care. Like, just like, I just want this baby out. And actually I didn't tear, which was amazing. I thought I was going to, I had a graze, but that was the first time. And then the second time, I imagined it was going to be the same, and it wasn't anywhere near that. It was just this really kind of all-encompassing, just primal, you've just got to get on with it. I've got a couple of analogies, actually. I remember years ago I did a snowboarding season in Val d'Isère, and one night I went up to the top, right up to the top on all the ski lifts, and I was by myself, and as I was coming down, it was, they'd close the lifts, and there was no one up there but me, and all of a sudden it became a whiteout. Yeah, so I literally couldn't see anything. I didn't know which way was up and which way was down, and then I fell over. And so I'm in all this snow, and I literally can't see anything. Everything is white. I'm completely by myself, and I had to like crawl out of all this like thick snow, like scramble out. And the more that I kind of scrambled, the more I sort of fell in this really deep snow. It was just surrounded by snow everywhere, and I just had to get myself out of there. I had to scramble out, and eventually I got to a bit that was slightly more compressed and less fluffy, and then I had to trust which way was down. Yeah, I just had to stand up. Once I stood up, I didn't know which way was down because I couldn't see anything, so I just had to stand up and trust. And I feel like that was quite a good analogy for me giving birth, because I just had to get myself out of it, and it didn't occur to me to kind of ask for pain relief, or just I was just doing it, and actually at the end that was really empowering for me. So yeah, that's
Beautiful.
that's one of the analogies.
All right, the last
I told
sentence
that
has
story,
just
actually.
broken up.
Not online, not shared it. Hey,
Yeah,
sorry,
the last sentence
what did you
just
say?
broke up. I just missed your last sentence because the internet broke up.
Oh right, okay. I can't remember what it was.
No,
Something incredibly profound, obviously.
make or break the interview. No, but I think it's beautiful to hear people's descriptions, especially when it's just real. Then, like
I
how it
think
was for each woman, and then you feel empowered, however it is.
for me, the second time giving birth, where I really, I had all the things the second time that someone needs. Yeah, I felt safe. I didn't have too many people in the room. Like Michel Odent, the well-known French obstetrician, he says that your birth sort of exponentially gets harder the more people are in the room. Yeah, and ideally, the fewer people are there, the better, really. So yeah, no, that might not be true of everyone. Some people might want their entire family and the dog with them and think that's brilliant, but birth physiology dictates really that we do like to feel unobserved, and we need to feel safe. when we give birth. And the second time I gave birth, I had all of those things. You know, I was where I wanted to be. I'd done the practice. I was with whom I wanted to be. There wasn't anyone in my birth space that I wouldn't have absolutely wanted to be there. The birth happened when it was supposed to, or when my baby said that I'm ready. So I had all of those 4 things that enables birth to be positive, and I feel so grateful and so lucky for that. And some people dismiss that experience, like, how dare you want that experience, why didn't you have it all managed? But actually, I don't believe the evidence is strong enough to have a managed birth experience for many women, unless you've got it's medically indicated in some way, and you feel that medical indication is a risk that you want to take, that you want to I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I feel
know
really
what you mean.
grateful.
If there's a medical indication, that means you want to change the plan to have medical support for the medical support.
Yeah,
That goes together.
Absolutely. And when people are in control of saying yes, and they feel informed, when they have a medical birth, they feel okay about it in general, because they've made those choices. Something about being coerced into something you don't really want, that actually you're probably going to end up feeling really rubbish about it, and that impacts upon how you feel about yourself, and you'll start with your baby as well. It's I don't think, my background's psychology, and I've worked in the NHS for a long time before I did birth, and I just don't feel like we're taking the psychological matters of birth as seriously as we should. It's all about the physical, and we're not really asking how women feel about this, and we're not taking that seriously as well, when we're not listening to her in a lot of cases.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. So finally, is there any final thought or piece of wisdom, something you'd like women to take away from listening to this interview, if there was one thing?
Oh, right, okay. So I would say gather as much information as you can about birth, on on your birth options, where you want to give birth, with whom you want, think carefully about with whom you want to give birth. If you're not getting the care, if you've got an inkling that the care isn't what you want, then have a look for other providers. You don't need to go with the most local trust or the most local hospital, and say what it is that have a think about what it is that you need, and make your own decisions. Don't be coerced into any intervention, any scan that you don't feel is the right thing for you. So I think that's probably the most important thing. Do some practice. Surround yourself with positive birth stories as well, especially if you're feeling negative. You might never have even heard a positive birth story, or think it's a fluke, but it really isn't. The women who prepare for birth and put in the practice tend to have better birth experiences.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming today. It's a really lovely interview. I've enjoyed listening to some of your birth stories. And
thank you so much, Charlotte. It's been an honour.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, take care.
Goodbye.
Bye.